how come you don't seem to have as much smoke for them as you do for the independent individuals and podcasters and things like that who are out there um, actually having open conversations, perhaps conversations you disagree with and would like to rebut? But I would think that if we're talking about power dynamics and influence, the mainstream media, the pharmaceutical companies, the CDC, the Fauci's and his equivalents around the world, the presidents and prime ministers, the people who are actually setting all of these policies and who are pushing out all this information en masse and who have, billions and trillions to do it with, if they are, as you said, if they've told lies and that they themselves have spread misinformation and disinformation, why are you not as critical of them as you are of, I don't know, whether it's a Joe Rogan or it's a Brett Weinstein or it's perhaps myself or, independent people who are just honestly trying to work out what the heck is going on?
Right. So I do criticize them. I have criticized the CDC before. I've criticized the government's handling of lockdowns, uh, multiple governments' handling of lockdowns. And but maybe you don't see that as much, and it isn't as prevalent on my channel because I'm in this space where I'm combating anti-vaccine misinformation. I'm combating the kind of misinformation that would have sucked me in as a kid when I used to believe a ton of conspiracy theories, because I think it's egregious and harmful, especially when people like Joe Rogan, will host someone like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and he'll say that he'll tell Joe Rogan that HIV doesn't cause AIDS, or there's a good case to be made that HIV doesn't cause AIDS. And Joe just sits there and nods his head like, yeah, wow, whoa, that's amazing. And I'm sitting there just thinking like, this is insane. This is like, how many people are going to believe this? And if a lot of people believe this is going to be super harmful. I mean,
Do you know? Do you not?
my
Do you? Oh, sorry. Let me not cut you off. Karen, finish
no,
your thought.
I was just going to tell a story. I mean, and this might be a little bit of a tangent, but I brought that up because I feel strongly about it. My dad's side of my family is from a small country in southern Africa called Eswatini, formerly known as Swaziland, and that is the most AIDS afflicted country in the world. My granny, who just passed away to about a year or two ago, um, I didn't get to see her much since she lives so far away. So, and time is weird, so I don't remember exactly how long ago it was now. But she had a farm where she raised a lot of AIDS orphans. There were a lot of orphans whose parents died from HIV/AIDS, and there were so many deaths there, partly because the president of South Africa at one time his name was Mbeki. He believed that the antiretroviral therapies used to keep people who are infected with HIV alive to like a normal lifespan were poison. He believed that, and so he didn't let a lot of citizens, or he didn't pay for the entry of antiretroviral therapy into South Africa, and as a result, there are a lot of AIDS cases now. And the reason he believed that is because of a virologist from I don't remember the university. It was in California, one of the UCs, and I'm not going to name him, but a virologist who Joe mentioned, who Robert F. Kennedy Jr. mentions in the book, who was pretty much single-handedly responsible for pushing the idea that HIV doesn't cause AIDS and that antiretroviral therapy are poison. And I mean, countless people have died from that, and I've seen the results of that. And so to have someone go on a podcast that is the most listened to podcast in the world and just say those things that are easily demonstrated as false is really frustrating to me. And so that's where I choose to focus my time, in preventing people from falling down that same rabbit hole that I fell into once. So that's where I
Do you
choose
think?
to. put my efforts.
Okay. I understand that. Do you think that people should be censored? There was a lot of censorship going on over the last few years. Do you think that that is an appropriate course of action?
I think that social media has a responsibility to uh, curate or at least do something on their platforms, not just let uh, things run wild. I mean, we can agree that certain things should not be allowed on social media, and we just disagree on where the line is. Um, and I'm not going to pretend to know where that line should be, but I think something should be done. So, do I agree with censorship? No. But I think that social media platforms can and should do what they think is right to uh, not allow certain content on their platforms.
I mean, given the nature of science itself and the way that things change, there can be and there have been things which are considered, conspiracy theories or which are very much against the scientific consensus at any moment in time, whether we're talking about this previous pandemic or we're talking about things further in the past, which people absolutely wanted to censor or do censor, and then they turn out to be the truth or at least have some truth in them. So don't you think that's somewhat dangerous to let the social media platforms decide what is, again, this is it comes back to the misinformation disinformation thing, because there could be something that in April 2020 it was considered misinformation or disinformation or a conspiracy theory, and then 2 years later it turns out to be true or to have an element of truth to it, and there could be then something, we're always learning more. I think that's the biggest issue. There's a lot of issues I take with censorship. Obviously, I mean, there's just the civil liberties aspect and the free speech aspect, but also from a scientific perspective and just human understanding, it's like, man, like it doesn't matter the subject. Everyone has their different opinions. Everyone has their different positions, perspectives, experiences, and so on. And one person's fact is another person's misinformation. One person's opinion is another person's disinformation. It's so messy that I'm personally of the opinion that what we are doing right now, this is the way to do it. So, Joe Rogan can have a podcast or whoever it is. I know he's got he's managed to build a massive podcast. He's got millions of listeners, but I think it's very, I think the sort of creeping authoritarianism and censorship is extremely concerning for a lot of reasons. I think you have to let people talk and have conversations. And there are people who have, there's all sorts of billions of people in this world who have all sorts of ideas that I disagree with, or things that I think are straight up silly or just completely wrong or even immoral or whatever. And I'm very much of the opinion that, hey, they got to be allowed to speak, and you should also be, and it runs both ways, right? If I say something which you think is wrong or you think is misleading people or you think is potentially harmful, and then you can come back with your position, or you say something which I'm like, oh, actually I think that that's objectionable because of XYZ, and I can have that conversation with you and we can have that back and forth. I think that's the best way to do it. I know it's messy. I know it's frustrating. I know that there are people who are gullible in all various directions. Um, but I don't see, but besides sort of having this massively increasing censorship state or censorship amongst tech companies or whatever the case may be, I don't see the alternative. I'm not even here trying to, prosecute people who are saying that, who were saying that, the vaccine is 100% safe and effective, and you're not going to get COVID if you take it or whatever. Like, I'm not trying to come after them. It's just like, I just think all the opinions and ideas have got to be able to float out there, and over the course of time, we get to the truth.
Sure, I see that perspective, but it's just, to me, as a scientist, when I look at the scientific literature and I see that there is a clear answer, and then I see people with vested interest in that particular answer not being the answer than making tons of money and gaining tons of influence and actively harming people in the process by going against that conclusion, then I see a problem with that. What action do we take?
Can I jump in?
We can debate that,
Sorry.
but
Okay.
but
Can I just take issue with the actively harming part? What do you mean by actively harming?
oh, so I mean, like when people actively are spreading ideas that, for example, that HIV doesn't cause AIDS, if they are convincing people of that, that's actively causing harm because those people are going to or could potentially die because of that information. We've seen that before. We've seen HIV, AIDS, these activists back in the 90s, early 2000s, who were on these big campaigns against antiretroviral therapy. And I tell a story of a mom who was very active in that group, who was HIV positive. She refused to take antiretrovirals. She had her second child, her daughter, refusing to take antiretrovirals against her doctor's advice. She passed HIV on to her daughter, and a few years later, both her and her daughter died. And that was a preventable death. But she wholeheartedly believed that because people were spreading a message that benefited them, but was actively harming others. And like I said, I take issue with that. I don't know what the solution is in this internet landscape we have. How exactly do we prevent that from happening? But I think that we should try to do something. And my effort of doing something is to put information out on my channel any way I can, no matter how big my channel is. Just that's how I deal with that frustration.